tonight because it is the 24th of Tevis. And as such, it is the yahrzeit, the Hilula, the passing of the Alter Rebbe. Now, what's very special here is that the Alter Rebbe is the one that taught us how special it is, the passing of a tzaddik, the yahrzeit of a tzaddik. And the Alter Rebbe taught that the day of the yahrzeit, the day of the passing of a tzaddik, all of the godliness that the tzaddik created his entire lifetime is shining. And each year it's shining in a greater and greater measure. And that energy is creating salvation in this world. It is creating salvation in our world. So what one definitely wants to do on the yahrzeit of a tzaddik is connect to him, to absorb that salvation energy. And for sure, the tzaddik who taught us this, we definitely know how powerful is his yahrzeit. And therefore, we definitely want to connect now to the Alter Rebbe, whose work we study every week. So we have a connection. We have a built-in connection anyway. We are his students. We are his adherents. We are those that follow in his way by studying his work. We're told that just as God writes himself into his writings, as he alluded to in the first word of the Ten Commandments, the first word of the Ten Commandments is Anoichi, I. And our sages say Anoichi is an acrostic. Ana nafshi kesavis yahavis. I put myself in the writings. So when God gave us the Torah, God gave us himself. And therefore, when we study Torah, we get him. And similarly, the righteous are similar to the Creator. And they also write themselves into their writings. So when we study their works, we access them. So every single week, as we study the Tanya, the work of the Alter Rebbe, we're his followers, we're his students, we're connecting to him, we're getting him. And especially today, with his energy shining, bringing salvation to the world, this is a wonderful time to really connect and to really draw down that salvation. So it should be so for all of us and for all people all over the world that are studying the works of the Alter Rebbe today, last night, today, tonight, that we should all experience this amazing salvation that the Alter Rebbe promises, guarantees, happens on the day of the passing, on the yahrzeit of the tzaddik, of the very, very, very godly person. So we are in the middle of chapter 26 that we began last week. And we explained that chapter 26 is really beginning a whole new section of Tanya, meaning the first 17 chapters of Tanya was the first section, a section focused on creating a love and fear of God. The next section, starting with chapter 18 through 25, was focused on helping us uncover an actually more powerful love, a natural love and fear embedded in our soul. And now, starting with chapter 26, we're discussing uprooting those emotions that so much impede our relationship with God and our own self, and instead implanting what does help us, the best thing to have to serve God. So we discussed last week that what we want to uproot is sadness and its behavioral manifestation of laziness, can't do anything in this, and also apathy and its behavioral manifestation of heaviness. And instead, what we want, what we're going to implant in ourselves is joy, which is expressed, its behavioral manifestation is energy. So we want to have the energy expressing the joy and check out the other things. And we go through several chapters of Tanya to do so. We're going to spend 3 chapters on removing sadness, and then 2 chapters on removing apathy. So we're just beginning this journey because we're at the beginning of chapter 26. We are up to Bimar Nafsho. We are on the first page of chapter 26, page 64, or the other side of page Lamed Beis. And we are 7 lines, exactly 7 lines from the bottom of the page. And what we were explaining exactly at this point is that the Alter Rebbe is saying sadness is so destructive. You could be much stronger spiritually, but if you're sad, you're so shackled, you're going to lose. As he gives the metaphor of 2 men wrestling, and if one is much stronger but very slow moving, he's going to lose. So our godly soul is much stronger than the other side. But if it's shackled by sadness, by apathy, it's going to lose. So one could respond to that and say, Alter Rebbe, but there's a verse from Solomon, the wisest of all men, who says in every sadness there's an advantage. So sadness isn't as bad as you're saying. And the Rebbe said, no. It says there will be an advantage, because the only advantage of sadness comes after. When the sadness is over, and then the joy you feel post-sadness, that's the advantage. And disclaimer number 2, when King Solomon is talking about the sadness, he's not talking about the regular garden variety, evil originated sadness. He's talking about a very specific type of sadness. It's actually a godly sadness, which we discussed last week, called merirus, which we translated poorly because there's no good translation for it that I know. An energized bitterness, an energy to change, a forward moving, I want things different type of feeling, which is coming from godliness. It's still sadness. You don't feel happy and good in that space, but it's coming from a godly source. It's coming from an energy of your soul, from the strength of your soul. And as such, it's not bringing you into the space of evil. We still are cautious about it because it's very easy to slide down to a negative, true, originating in evil sadness. It's like too closely related, but one needs it as a tool that one uses with caution. You respectfully, cautiously use that tool. And what we're talking about there, the situation when you would respectfully, cautiously use that tool of that type of sadness, the only type which is positive if used cautiously, is if you sinned. Because if you sinned, you do have reason to be sad. You messed up and you harmed self, God, the world, maybe other people, maybe other items. I mean, there's a lot of things you can be sad about. But we don't really want you to be in sadness. But you probably are going to start off in sadness. But we really want you to turn it right away, because sadness is coming from evil. And we want you right away to turn it into this energized bitterness, energy of change, thinking forward, thinking about God, thinking about change from holiness. And we don't want you to stay in there too long either. We want you to do what you have to do to repent, to feel broken in a godly way, and then get out and come to joy. And that's what Solomon meant, that after sadness, there will be joy, a true sadness, a godly sadness, an energized bitterness sadness. After that's over, there's joy. And that's the joy post, when you're done, when you can appreciate the sweetness of light because you were in the darkness.
Did you say one was more forward focused and one is more past stuck?
Yes. So when we discussed this last week, we contrasted what's the normal, unhealthy, depressive sadness versus the godly, but still used cautiously, energized bitterness sadness. And we said the unhealthy one is very much focused on the past. I did, he did, she did. And the godly one is focused on the future, because the unhealthy one, you feel very stuck. And in the godly one, you're focused on change. That's where you think about the future, because you're focused on change. And in the unhealthy one, you're focused on yourself, which is never a great space to be in. And in the healthy one, you're focused on God. So you're focused on God. You're looking forward. You're focused on change. And still we say, do this cautiously. Because even this, you could fall. You could fall into the other one. So therefore, use it. We have to use it. If you sinned, you have no choice. You have to use it. But then we want you to move out of it. It's not a place to wallow in. Even though it's from a godly source, it's still not a place to stay in too long. Any other questions?
Yeah, I just feel like I think for ourselves, I think for me, but I'll just speak for myself. Is if
It's nice to
something
have you
happens
on,
to me-
Yotis. It's been a long time. I'm glad
It's
you're
so
up to
good
it
to
and in
be
the
on.
class.
Very good to be on. I'm so happy to be on. It just seems like every Tuesday night something else is happening. So like, I think the difficulty often for me comes not if something happened to me or when I'm wallowing in that bitterness, more like if something happened to my kids. It's hard to let that go. Like when you see the results and you knew that was going to be a result of those things happening and you can't do much about it because Hashem orchestrated it. I don't know. I just find that to be a difficult.
It's a huge challenge. And I think sometimes as humans, we have to sort of, maybe the compromise we have to make, to give our humanity some space, sort of like as it says, I know this is true because I learned it inside. I unfortunately, like many things, I'm very bad at remembering where. I only saw it once and I'd love to see it again. But I do remember I saw this inside. I did not make this up. That when Sarah heard the news from the angels that she would have a baby, it says she laughed. And the question is, how did she laugh? She's Sarah. She's a matriarch, Sarah. And this answer I saw once is her body laughed. And how I interpreted that answer in my brain is she's the matriarch Sarah and she has a human body. So we also have human bodies. And sometimes we have to accept and embrace and give credence to our bodies and to our threshold of pain and to our sensitivity and to things that trigger us for any number of very varying reasons. So in the world of absolute theory, if you were wired completely different with a completely different inner structure and completely different history and completely different everything, it would happen. And you would have perfect, it's all Achdus Hashem, it's all God, it's all good, though it doesn't feel good at all. And you'd move on. But you happen to be human and you happen to have a different set of wiring than that. And I think sometimes what you have to do is say, okay, I'm going to give myself a little space to feel the pain and to accept it as God and accept it as good and process it. And then I'm going to do all the spiritual work. I'm going to release it and I'm going to move on. Because otherwise you would just swallow it and that would be even worse.
That's very real. I like that. It's interesting because last week my son came from Eretz Yisrael and surprised me. And it was the most wonderful surprise. But when he walked in, I literally could not make a peace between my eyes and my head and my heart. Like they were just all going in different directions. My eyes saw him, my head couldn't believe it, my heart, and it's kind of like that processing of like, it just takes time to everything to get together, our heart, our head, our eyes, our soul, our body. It's very true.
It does. And we see this with Yaakov Avinu, right? It says when he was told that Yosef was alive, he needed that wow, really? Yeah. It's really true. It's really true. It's really true. So, yeah. And they say also when the Rebbe heard of the victory of Hatavis, these are good things. These are great things. Seeing your son is amazing. But yeah, we need time to process. But what we're aiming for, and what Yehudis understands, and what we're aiming for is, even if we give ourselves that time, and sometimes we must, because that's our only way of operating in a healthy fashion, we're still coming from a perspective of, but we don't want to stay in this space any longer than we have to, because it's a dangerous space. Even though we're talking here in a very godly level, this energized bitterness is coming from godliness. And coming from godliness, it's still a dangerous space because we're human. And as humans, from a godly, holy, forward movement, I'm going to change, you could morph into a negative, rooted in evil, wallowing in self-pity and stuckness. I did it and I've done it and I'm probably always going to do it. It happened to me, it's happening to me, it'll probably always happen to me. So because that slope is so slippery, that's why even in this space we're talking about here, this godly sadness, this energized bitterness, we want to be very careful. We want to be in it just as long as we need to be. We're pretending we're surgeons. We might not be, but we're pretending we're surgeons, that we can go in and go out. Exactly what we need to achieve this goal. Now, continuing, and now we're 7 lines.
Can I just add, I just
Sure.
wanted, hi.
Sarah.
So what happens if somebody's like processing trauma? Or what happens if somebody had one very traumatic event that keeps coming back to them? Would it be correct within the Tanya framework, because I do the therapeutic framework also, to that it's good enough if they're in process with trying to process things and get over? Because when big things happen to people, it affects every different part of their life.
So in the Tanya framework, when we're talking about processing trauma or even guided imagery and reliving and all of those things, we only want to do it from a space of kedusha, of mariros, not of atzvos. Now, when you're processing trauma, your goal is to get out of it. Your goal is to refashion it. Your goal is to put a new frame of reference around it. Your goal is to say that was then and you accept it and you move on. Or you weren't safe then, you were 10, now you're safe, now you're 45.
But that could take a lot of ongoing work, like just, like how we say peeling an onion, getting every single layer off of there. But
So you would want to do it if you feel it's something that takes many, many times. The best would be each time briefly, a little bit, just to get a little bit more clarity, a little bit more healing, a little bit more acceptance, a little bit more awareness of like, I'm safe now, that was then, this is now, talking to that inner child, and then get them out of it and move on. You wouldn't want like long sessions.
Right, but sometimes that's a tall order.
Sometimes, but that's you asked me the
Right.
Tanya perspective.
Right,
I
you're
am giving you
right.
the answer. So you
I'm
now
sorry,
know,
I'm like,
you now know the perspective, and then you have to see how this translates in the vernacular, how you can take the
Right.
goal and make it work. And maybe for this client, it means 20 minutes and not 40. And for this client, it means 30 and not 60. But the general premise is it's not healthy. That's the point of the Alter Rebbe. It's not healthy. But it's a tool to help. So therefore, use the tool cautiously. Use the tool respectfully. Use the tool knowing it's a dangerous tool and it could go in both directions. But yes, 100%. You have to do it. I totally understand. But you still want to do it in a way that's like, again, especially if you're guiding someone. So you're the surgeon saying, now we're pulling out. Now we're moving on because it's not going to be healthy to keep going.
I think that there's an aspect here that is very important. And that is this brain elasticity, or these brain ruts, or when people go through traumas, there is certain it's a cellular memory, and there's cellular rut that they got stuck in from the trauma. So I think that because it happened, it's a body, mind, it's emotional, etc. There's so many aspects to it. So I think it's not a simple thing because of this, and they say this now with brain science, that it's like there's ruts that were created in the brain that caused a person from this trauma to be a certain way, and they're trying to get past that.
I totally hear what you're saying, and I'm not disagreeing with any of it. I'm being loyal to what the Alter Rebbe is saying, and I'm saying each one of us has to mesh that goal with whatever we have to do and understand that's the goal. Meaning if the general premise is, talking about what Sarah was saying, it's not good to go back into negative spaces. But at the same time, sometimes you have to heal. So say, okay, so how do I balance those two things? How do I balance knowing I have to go into this space with being aware that it's a dangerous space?
I always feel
the
like
juggling act.
whenever I go to something, I always have this thing. I always say to myself, I'm not at Yosef Asadik yet, but I will be. I'm not there yet where I know this is God's plan. I know it's all good, but I'm going to be there.
And we're going to try. And what we have to do, and we're going to move on at this point because I'm probably losing some people who are not interested in this discussion.
Sorry.
No, it's fine. It's fine. But I think what Yehuda is saying, I just want to comment on her last point because I think that was so authentic. I'm not at tzaddik yet. I'm not perfectly righteous yet. I'm not exactly, God's gift to man yet, but I'm getting there. And the way we get there,
I would say Yosef Asadik.
A tzaddik again and again and again and again. And each time we hear it, it gets in a little deeper. Each time we hear it, it penetrates a little more. As Lubavitchers, we relearn this work every year. Now, again, sometimes we're just sort of saying it without thinking of what we're saying, but sometimes we're paying attention. And each time it gets in a little deeper. I think in this class recently, we were referencing the idea of Rabbi Akiva's rock. Remember, we spoke about the drops that bore a hole in a rock. So too, each time we revisit these ideas, each time we relearn these ideas, some of you have been with me many years as we've relearned these ideas many years, and each time a little more, my inner reality is concurrent with these principles. A little more, and that's the goal. That's our goal. So continuing, we're saying here that the person who is going through this kosher, when done surreptitiously, energized bitterness, it's real energized bitterness. It's not a fun space. If a person sinned and is repenting or did something wrong and feels really bad about it, there's a lot of pain. It's deep. It's not a happy feeling. It's a harsh feeling. But sometimes we need that harsh feeling to shatter the evil that was created by our actions. As the Rebbe says, 7 lines from the bottom, the mar nafsho. When a person has this energized bitterness, there's a bitter spirit, the lev nishbar, and a broken heart. And because we are striving here to crush the spirit of evil. In other words, again, the only time at this moment that we're saying you should legitimately go into this space is because you sinned and because you're repenting and because there is a bitter feeling then, but forward thinking, change-oriented, bitter pain. Why do I want to have this pain then either? Why don't I just happily realize I sinned and I'm going to be so different and our life is awesome? Because there's an evil that was energized. There's an evil that was given more substance, and I need to break that evil. And when I break my heart emotionally over my sins, I break the spirit of evil associated with that heart. The spirit of evil that was empowered and engendered by the negativity I did. That's why evil wants a Jew to sin, because it gets a lot of mileage, gets a lot of energy, gets a lot of fat from it. So when I break emotionally my heart through this energized bitterness, that's a very unhappy space to be in. And it's a tough space. And I'm going to be in it for a short time. I'm going to break all the evil that was created from this. As it says, okay, you are going to smash the wall of iron. Iron is traditionally a metal associated with evil. As the word itself, Barzel, iron, is an acronym. It stands for, if you can envision the word Barzel, Bilha, Rachel, Zilpah, Leah. Bilha, the maidservant of Rachel, of Rachel, and Zilpah, the maidservant of Leah. Sometimes taught to children, when they're like in elementary school and trying to remember which maidservant goes to which woman. Well, Barzel, Bilha, Rachel, Zilpah, Leah. Barzel, Bilha goes to Rachel, Zilpah goes to Leah. But Chassidus says this is a backwards order because the maid, the Bilha or the Zilpah, is put before the mistress, Rachel or Leah. And that's indicative of evil. That's the egoism, the chutzpah, the audacity of evil. Again, we're not putting down Bilha or Zilpah here. It's symbolic of this energy. So that's why Barzel, iron, is that metal used to represent evil. So when a person sins, they energize an evil that's a wall, that's a barrier, that's a separation between them and God. Iron. On the positive note, this is very parenthetical, but the Rebbe speaks in connection to the fast of the 10th of Tammuz that we had a few weeks ago, how by the third temple, by the first and second temple and the tabernacle in the desert, we weren't allowed to use iron. But by the third temple, we will use iron because it also has potential for enormous greatness. And this whole concept of the maidservants before the mistresses, in a godly sense, is amazing. I'm not going to go into it now because it'll be long and very divergent, but just there is the positive manifestation of that iron. King David, a long time ago, gathered a lot of iron for the temple. Very weird because you're not allowed to use iron in the temple. The Rebbe says it was for the third temple. We're going to then use even iron. That will also be part of serving God. That was parenthetical.
Just talked about that last night in Rabbi Silberberg. We're going through the whole Nach. And that was, mama.
Wow. When things like that happen, you feel there's something in the air. And we're
Yeah,
both picking up on it, because it was totally random.
I'm almost.
For him, it might have been tzach. By me, it was completely random.
Yeah, wow.
Okay, I've seen that. I've seen it sometimes, you say something and then afterwards you realize there was a reason and it had nothing to do with anything I knew about. Okay. So the person created all of this negative energy by his sins. And now by his broken heart, he's smashing that spirit. He's smashing that energy. He's smashing that iron wall. That's the barrier between him and his Father in heaven, between him and God. Now, where'd the author ever get this from? He said, I didn't make this one up. As it's explained in the Zohar. Zohar is the most foundational Kabbalistic work. And in the Zohar, on a verse in Psalms, in Tehillim, it says, Al Pasuk, Ruach Nishpara Lev Nishpar V'Goymer. A broken heart, a broken spirit. So the Rebbe is commenting on something, elucidating and explaining something that's cryptically referenced in the Zohar to explain an allusion in Psalms and Tehillim. So in Psalms, King David writes, Ruach Nishpara, Lev Nishpar, the broken spirit, the broken heart, which in the Zohar, it explains that broken spirit is a spirit of evil, which the Alter Rebbe is telling us means when you break your heart in a healthy, godly way over your sins, and you really feel broken in a Mariras fashion, energized bitterness, forward thinking, change oriented, God focused, then you're going to break that spirit of evil that got so much power from your action. So your broken heart is breaking the spirit of evil. And then it gets better because we don't want to stay in this unhappy, energized bitterness, even though it's holy space at all. And then is fulfilled the beginning of the verse. Because this verse, this psalm, actually, we say, it's actually, as we're going to read, what's said when people do custom, I'll discuss it called Tikkuch Chatzos. It's a famous psalm. We say it in the prayers we say before going to sleep at night. And in this psalm, in Psalm 51, the beginning of the verse says, Tashmi'eni sasam v'simcha. Let me hear joy and gladness. Hashiva li sason yish'echa. Restore to me the joy of your salvation. V'ruch nadiva v'daimer, and a bountiful spirit, etc. So the Rebbe is saying, the end of the verse, as quoted in the Zohar, that Kabbalistic foundational work, is our broken heart breaks the spirit of evil. But the beginning of the verse is where we're aiming toward. And that's about joy. So this is the point the Rebbe is making in explaining, if you remember this quote from Proverbs, from Mishlei, B'chol eitzev yihiyeh mutar, in every sadness there will be, post, after, an advantage, the joy. So the Rebbe is saying, even when you messed up, we're human. We acknowledged that already a few times in this class. We're human, and we messed up, and we regret it, and we're trying to change, and we're in this movement of change, and I did wrong, and I feel bad about it. And that badness that we feel, that emotional brokenness of our own hearts, is breaking the evil that was created. And then I want to move on. And I want to move on to joy. Joy that it's over. Joy that I'm done with this negativity. Joy that I repaired the damage. I did damage control. Joy that the evil was destroyed. Joy that now I'm in a place of godliness and goodness and positivity. Because it's not healthy, not for me and not for anyone, to be in that negative space. Even as we discussed earlier at length, sometimes it's necessary, but even when it's necessary, it's not a good space to be in.
I have a question.
Yes.
Are you, I'm sorry because I came in late, so maybe you said this already, but are you saying that is the Rebbe saying that the only way to break the like power that came with the wrong action is to have a lev nishbar, meaning that it's the only way to break it? You can't.
It's not the only way. The Rebbe here is using this conversely. So as we explained, so here we will accept that hopefully other people understood this, but maybe not. I've usually noticed when someone asks a question, there's like a bunch of other people that have the same question. Or when you ask it, wonder. The Rebbe here is talking about how he does not want you to be sad. How sadness is a very, very unhealthy space. How sadness is an extremely dangerous position to be in as someone who wants to serve God and as someone who wants to be healthy in general.
Right, that I understood.
So therefore, because of that, the Rebbe now went into this whole thing to respond to a skeptic's question, but there's a verse in Proverbs in Mishlei that says it's good to be sad. B'chol eitzev yeh mutar. In every sadness, there's an advantage. So the Rebbe said, no, let me explain what that means. Let me unpack that whole concept. So everything we just explained today,
right,
is explaining if you're in that type of sadness, then there'll be the advantage that afterwards you'll have the joy. But to answer your question, is the Rebbe creating this as the only road to deal with evil that you've created? No, because that's not the point of what the Rebbe is doing here. No.
Meaning, like through simcha or recognizing the chashivas of who I am, I can also get rid of that negative, like whatever negative.
It depends.
Or
it depends. I'd like to say yes, but no, it really depends. It depends on what the person did. It depends on how damaging it was. It depends on how deeply it affected the world, other people, objects, the person's soul, God. There are some things that you really need that real deep inner brokenness. It's actually mandatory.
Okay, I hear.
But not everything.
Okay.
For sure, not everything. And there's another whole entirely different road. But again, this is discussed earlier and later in Tanya, not really here, which is the road called tshuva from love. This whole road is tshuva from fear.
Right.
From turning to God from fear.
I'm only asking the question because what you're describing, what the Rebbe is describing, is not so natural for me to go to a lev nishbar state. So I tend to go to.
So you should go to a tshuva me'ahava space. And the tshuva me'ahava space, in incredible brevity, just to explain the concept in a very small nutshell, is because of whatever you did wrong, realizing that that really, really separated you from God and you really want God.
Right.
And therefore throwing yourself into even more service of God than ever before. And as you're doing that more, having in mind that the reason why I'm so much more excited to daven and so much more excited to learn and so much more excited to share with others is because what I did made me feel so far and I want to be so close.
Right.
And that's called a tshuva also, because the reason you're getting so close is because of what you did wrong, because you were so far.
Right.
So that is actually the deepest and the best tshuva possible. As the Alter Rebbe writes it in Tanya, it's only the work of very holy people. As the Rebbe explains it currently, because we're so close to Mashiach, so the energy of tzidkus, of godliness is so strong. So it's really something every one of us can access. And I highly advise it. And it's even more powerful than the other more traditional road. It creates more power.
Thank you.
Sure. Any other questions? Okay. So what the Rebbe is saying here is a greater joy following pain. Does that resonate? Has anyone here, you remember feeling, experiencing this, going through something hard and afterwards having a greater joy that came from being in that pain?
Like we always say, you don't ask for the experience. Like if Hashem would give me a multiple choice, okay, what do you want in your life? I would be like, no, thank you, none of the above, right? But
Exactly.
after the fact, you would never sell the experiences for all the money in the world, because you see really the connection that it gave you with yourself, with the people around you, with Hashem, and that's the good. But it's very hard to see that when you're in it. It's only really after that you start to see it.
Exactly. And that's what King Solomon is saying here. After, not during, after. And what Adasa is saying is really exactly a famous, or to me, very powerful vignette from the previous Lubavitcher Rebbe, that he says exactly what she says about his horrific incarceration and the Soviets in 1927. And he says, if before then, I could have paid all the money in the world to escape any moments of that pain, I would have paid all the money in the world. And he did not have money. And he meant it. But he said, but afterwards, after it's done, after I experienced it, after I'm over, I wouldn't sell 1 minute of that experience for all the money in the world. And that to me is something that rings in my ears, exactly that concept of like, yeah, we're not choosing, we don't want, but when we're done, it's something that makes us who we are in a tremendously different way. Someone else can relate to this, could share about feeling the joy specifically after going through something painful?
I definitely feel that when it becomes like a superpower, almost like what you get from it, it's like it brings out from ourselves this depth of like a strength of, it's something that comes, that we get something much deeper somehow, like it becomes that's what I see, that it becomes like a power.
So Yehuda is already going to my next questions, which is like, why? Oh, just 1 second. I thought I was plugged in. Why is it so more powerful? And she's saying that it's coming from a deeper place. It's deeper than just, again, how would we define joy? What was a regular joy feel like? And in essence, a joy a lot of times is enrooted. The Lubavitcher Rebbe says that a real joy is enrooted in inner peace, menuchas hanefesh, a sense of you are where you're supposed to be, doing what you're supposed to be doing, in your space, moving forward. And that's like a very solid feeling. And that's a very solid joy. But Yodas is saying this type of joy is coming from a much deeper place, much deeper than that. It came from your inwards that were squeezed. And now what you've extracted from that is something much, much deeper and therefore much more powerful. Anyone else? Anyone else had this type of experience and would like to share about it? Would like to reflect on it? I'm sure we've all had it. If you haven't, that's awesome. I'm sure all of us at times have gone through hard stuff. And hopefully afterwards, it's not just the, it's over, which might be the feeling, but that wouldn't be a deeper and a better feeling. That would just be like relief. Here, we're not just saying, it's over. We're saying, maybe like Adasa was saying before, the gain, the depth, how you shifted, how you changed, how you have a different understanding, and therefore a different appreciation. We probably have a different appreciation of the stuff we appreciated before, but we probably have a different appreciation, a deeper appreciation, which is creating a deeper joy. So the Rebbe now connects this, as we're going to see, to the custom that I assume none of us have ever done, of what was done when people did something that I assume none of us have ever done, called Tikkun Chatzos. Tikkun Chatzos is a optional, so we're all fine that we never did it, nightly, or sometimes only Thursday night, lamentation at Jewish midnight, which is roughly 12, nowadays it's a bit earlier, for the destruction of the temple. It is not as commonly done nowadays at all. It's probably very, very rarely done. But in previous generations, it was something that was more commonly done, not by common man, but by many of the more scholarly, more spiritual people, where they literally took time every night to mourn the destruction of the temple. And obviously, when they were mourning the destruction of the temple, they were not in a very happy, uplifted space. It was mourning. It was real deal mourning. It was really feeling destruction and probably translating destruction into any of its mirror reflections. And yet afterwards, when they finished those prayers that you can find in the back of the prayer book, it's not long. When they finished those prayers, they said this verse from Psalms that we're citing, which speaks about the broken spirit, the broken heart, and speaks about joy. So even in this situation, when you're going into deep mourning over the destruction of the temple and the exile of the divine presence and how that's still felt in the world today, the temple was destroyed 1900 some years ago, but it's still being destroyed. And yet we move from there into joy. And how is that joy expressed? What's the most joyous thing a Jew knows how to do? Connecting to God. And therefore, after this lamentation, they say this psalm as the bridge to start learning Torah. And in that way, feel the joy of the current happy reality that they're so one with God. So let's read that inside. And this is the simple reason, implying there are others, but this is for people like us, the simple reason. L'tikun ha'arizal, to the injunction of the Arizal. The Arizal was probably the second greatest Kabbalist of all times, and he was one that instituted this custom. Lomar mizmar zeh, to say this psalm, chapter 51 of Psalms of Tehillim, that contains the element of the brokenness and the element of the joy. Achar tikun chatzos, koidim halimud, transitioning from the lamentation, the mourning of the destruction of the temple, to the study of Torah that's supposed to be done and should be done, and by these people is being done with great joy. Kidei lilmu b'simcha amitis, to learn with real joy, the Havaya in God, haba achar ha'etzev, which comes after that real sadness. Like we said, well, real sadness for Riras is when we sin. Or real sadness could be when you're lamenting the destruction of the temple. Or when you're feeling pain for other people and their pains.
In Kriya Shema Al Hamita, we don't say this Shabbos and Yontif.
And that's why. If you're it's very interesting what Sarah said. If you're focused, I'm not claiming I always am. When I used to be focused in my prayers, it made perfect sense to me which sections of the Shema prayer, when we say Shema before we go to sleep at night, we don't just say the Shema, which is 2 lines and 3 paragraphs. We say like 2 paragraphs before and a few pages after. And on the Sabbath or on a holiday, every once in a while, we're skipping paragraphs very randomly. If you're focused on what you're saying, it makes perfect sense why. Right. That's what we think. God's giving us a little break here. But if you actually are focused on what you're saying, every single paragraph you skip make perfect sense.
Yeah.
They're all paragraphs that are more down, more focused on wrong we've done and such topics. And we're not going there. Just like Hadassah said before about another version of repentance, like the positive, happy version of the story. So the Sabbath and the holidays, our version of introspection is only in the positive, happy, closer and closer to God dimension. And that's why we skip this psalm. Sarah's right. We skip it on Friday nights and on the holidays, because even though it has the element of joy, it also has that element of deep sadness, of deep brokenness over wrong. And on the Sabbath and the holidays, we're past that. We're not even going there. But when you did go there, not on Sabbath or holidays, if you sinned, if you're thinking about the destruction of the temple, if you're thinking about someone else's pain, if you were in a space of brokenness, and then afterwards you came to joy, this joy is more powerful. Like the quality, the superiority of light that follows darkness. It's so much more strong. It's so much more appreciated. It's coming from such a deeper place. When you've really experienced it, and I assume we've all experienced it on some level, maybe we forgot, but hopefully, I know we've all gone through hard stuff. That's just the lot of the human. And I hope we've all experienced the joy that follows. And that joy is coming from a deeper place. It's a greater light shining because of the darkness. And in a sense, it's a light coming from the darkness. That the deepest transformation we make is when we actually transform the darkness itself. So it's light that's emerging from darkness. And the light that emerges from darkness is the greatest light. I'm giving this metaphorically. There's many deep levels on what I just said, but just on a simple level to sort of process it very simply. It's like if you have a very difficult child, and then there's those glimmers of joy and of success and of achievement. And hopefully with all your children, you have those moments and experiences. But when it's from that child, oh, wow, is that joy coming from a very, very, very deep place? It's a light from the darkness. And that's a very, very, the most powerful light.
I think you made it, I think your example makes it very clear and very tangible for us to understand. I mean, for me personally, because we all experienced things that were very difficult. And then we overcame, there's tremendous joys. I think everybody gets that, but giving that as like an example of what it feels like to do this type of tshuva, like makes it real for me. I can, like, you can put your brain to kind of wrap it around like why that makes sense. So I appreciate it.
Thank you. Thank you. And I guess because the example resonates. That's why we're like, oh, we know what that feels like. Baruch Hashem, we do. Like it says in the Zohar, again, we're referencing this most foundational Kabbalistic work. So this is again from King Solomon. So the wisest of all men, he said something very deep and powerful. He said, I have seen the advantage of light over darkness like the advantage of wisdom over folly. And when we look at these words, we're like, hey, I could also be King Solomon. What's he saying here? Light's better than darkness. Wisdom's better than folly. Well, wisdom and folly are metaphorical. It means godliness and evil. Yeah, I knew that too. What's he saying? What's he saying? What he is saying is there's something very powerful about light, and it has a very unique relationship to darkness. And the relationship of light to darkness, which is always good for us to remember, is that the presence of light dispels darkness automatically. No fight. You light that match, you light that candle, you turn on that electric bulb, and the darkness is automatically dispelled. That is the point that King Solomon is telling us. When there's light, the darkness recedes. When there's godliness, the evil recedes. When I have gone through the pain and now feel that joy is that light. And that light, that joy is just pushing away automatically. No fight. It's so powerful. It just automatically dispels that darkness. And really, as I'm saying, it's being fed by the darkness because it's taking that energy of darkness, and from the darkness, it's creating that light. From the pain, it's creating that joy. Like that metaphor I gave, that from a understood and related to as a mother. So if you're a mother, it's an easy metaphor. If you're not, create a different one in your mind. There are many others, but the darkness itself is what's feeding my joy in its transformed fashion. The limitation itself, that place of smallness, that place of pain, is the growth, is the achievement. So it's coming from a much deeper and more powerful place. It's darkness transformed. That's what the light is. Ayin Sham. So the Rebbe says you can look it up there in the Zohar for people that want more. V'dai l'mevin. But it's be enough for those of us that understand Kabbalistic secrets. Umikra male diber hakasuv. And this is a very incredibly important quality. The Rebbe is saying, as I think I mentioned last week, the early Hasidim weren't called Hasidim. The term Hasidim actually is a term the opponents to the Hasidic movement gave their protagonists. They called us Hasidim. But before that, there was another term we were called, and that was Freilichers. Freilichers is a Yiddish term that means the joyous ones. And the Rebbe now is saying this quality is so important. Just like sadness is like something that if you have that blow, everything else is going to fall apart. When you're in a space of joy, it has the ability to lift everything else up. And that's why, of course, in Tanya, the Alter Rebbe does this amazingly chutzpahdik thing. He makes God so rational. He makes understanding God's infinite, we're finite, so our brains can't understand him, but it still starts making sense to us. So the more we absorb the ideas of Tanya, the more we absorb the ideas that there's only God. It's all God, and he's all good. And whatever I'm going through that doesn't seem good is just because I wanted something else that's not good for me. The timing is off for what I want. God's waiting for it to be the right and the best timing. Maybe this is a challenge and I need to overcome the challenge, to have the merit of overcoming the challenge, to have the growth of overcoming the challenge. And for various other reasons as well. I just picked the most common ones. But whatever the color and flavor, it's all God, it's all good. And the more I can breathe that in, intellectually digest it, emotionally absorb it, the more I can be constantly in the space of joy. And the Rebbe says, "Umikra mole diber hakasuv," and the verse says this very explicitly. What does the verse say? Very strong words. This is a quote from the Torah. Tachas asher lo avadata es havaya elokecha besimcha v'gaimer. because you did not serve God with joy. Now, where is this verse? What are we talking about here? Well, there's a section in Deuteronomy that enumerates many, many horrible things that will come to the Jewish people. Now, twice in the Torah, we go through like what we call curses, the horrible things that will happen to us when we don't serve God. But the first time, the Torah lists 7 transgressions, and then units of 7 of consequences for those 7 transgressions until we repent. That's the first time around. First 48 curses. But the second time around in Deuteronomy, when it's 98, we don't really see what we did wrong. I mean, obviously we understand what we did wrong, but it's not very explicit. There's one verse in the middle that talks about what we did wrong. And what does that verse say? Because you did not serve God with joy. Now, obviously, basic understanding is true. It's because you didn't serve God. But it's pointed out by the Arizal, that second most famous Kabbalist of all times, and others, that the point of the verse could even be understood. You served, but you didn't serve with joy. It's not enough to serve. You have to serve with joy. Serving with joy means you're really serving. You're really invested. You're really there. And it's almost like in a very simple sense, and we don't have to get very deep about it. If I'm excited to do a mitzvah, to serve God, to do a commandment, if I'm excited to go to a class, if I'm excited to learn his Torah, what does that mean? It means I'm excited about this relationship. I appreciate this relationship. I value it. It's special to me. It's like so special that I have another opportunity to connect. That's exciting. You fell in love. You have another opportunity to send a message, to make a call, an email, a text, a WhatsApp, many other options today. It's exciting. A bit of connection is exciting with the one you love, that you're so passionate, excited about the relationship. So the joy factor is really, in a very, very true sense, expressing not what am I doing, but what's the relationship about? And therefore, it's fundamental. And that's why, as we absorb the concepts like the unity of God, and it's all God, and it's all good, and it's all him, and he loves me absolutely, and then we think about them again, and then we think about them again, it helps us naturally feel so joyous in our life and so joyous in our relationship to God. As the Rebbe says, V'noida lekol perush harizal al pasuk zeh. And we all know, the Rebbe doesn't bother telling us, because we all know how the Arizal explains this verse. Well, if we didn't know, I just told you. But the problem wasn't that they weren't serving. The problem is they weren't serving with joy. So we are right now, if you are looking inside, it's very unusual, because usually the Tanya just no grammatical markings at all on any level, and therefore for the same reason, no division into paragraphs. But if you're looking inside, actually here, you see, hey, we actually came to a stopping point. It's almost like there's 2 clear sections in this chapter, which there are, because we just finished like the general overview. And now, starting next week, we're going to say, but what if there's a valid reason to be sad? There are some valid reasons to be sad. What if there's valid physical stuff going on in your life? Or what if there's valid spiritual reasons like sins or continuing? So that's what we're going to discuss starting next week. Thank you so much for joining. Very special to be learning Tanya on the day when the Alter Rebbe's energy is shining so strongly. And we all have this merit of being connected to him and tapping into his energy of bringing salvation. Would someone like to share some little salvation they've experienced this past week? Something they'd like to thank God for?
Can you hear me?
Rachel, sure.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, good. Well, my salvation is I am finally
You're in
one place.
Yay! After after having been in
Oh my
3.
gosh.
Hey,
This was, I tell you, 7 months of, I don't know what to call it, but it was not easy. Everything is in boxes. I can't find anything, but I have a kitchen and I have a bathroom and I have beds and that's it. Everything
Day by
else
day.
is in boxes, day by day, exactly.
I'm so
So
happy for
Baruch
you. I know
Hashem,
it's been pushed
Baruch
off many
Hashem.
times.
Yeah. Just to be in a place that we made the way we like it, the way it fits us, it's just beautiful. So I'm very,
We can't
very
wait to see it.
thankful.
Can't wait to
Yeah,
crash.
yeah. Well, I would love to have a shiur in my new place, Bezrat Hashem.
Once you
So
push away some of the boxes.
exactly. So
I'm
anyway,
so happy
I
for you.
didn't.
We're all so happy for you. We all know what it feels like, packing and construction, and that's like a horrible word to say. Just raises way too much trauma, speaking about trauma. So we're very,
Exactly.
very, very, very happy for you. And it's definitely
Thank
something to
you.
thank God for, not to take for granted. The light from the darkness, looking around and appreciating your
Oh, yeah.
place,
Exactly.
your vision
Yeah,
in the flesh.
Baruch Hashem.
In
And
one
I
place,
did
not
not,
3.
want to miss the first shiur in my new place. So
So you're on.
hopefully this will be, this will
Baruch
be
Hashem.
every week. Bezrat Hashem bli neder.
We're honored that this is the first year in your new place.
Thank you.
Someone else has something they'd like to share, something they'd like to thank God for, something that happened over this week?
Well, I do have something. I mean, it was kind of miraculous. I'm going to be a little vague because I don't want to give the details, but I thought that I had, and I was feeling really, I guess, sad because I thought I had caused someone some substantial financial loss because that I was kind of responsible of them missing something that was very, very important. And it was a government thing. And I like here it's Chavdalid. It didn't look like it was reversible, but today was Chavdalid, Tavis, and I made my hechletas and I mean, miraculously it was able to be reversed. So
Oh, wow.
it was a big deal. It was substantial. So I am very, very grateful. So I just wanted to express that it was a miracle. And in the Alter Rebbe's list, and I said, like, even though Al Pi Teva, by nature, it can't be fixed, but Abishtra, he loves us, and there's no limits to Hashem, and we could just live above what nature says. So it was really cool.
Baruch Hashem. I'm really glad it worked out for you. Baruch Hashem. It's really horrible to think you caused someone else such damage. Baruch Hashem. I'm so glad it worked out. Glad the Alter Rebbe energy kicked in for you. Poil Yeshua's B'Kerev Haaretz, creating salvation in this world. Anyone else have something they'd like to share? Okay, so then let's do, that was beautiful, both things. Thank you so much. Let's do from, in honor of Liba, as a aliyah for her neshama. Let's do from the talk of the Rebbe of Shabbos Parshas Va'era. This is from the 28th of Tevis, like will be this week, the portion of Va'era in 1992. So the Rebbe here is talking, the Rebbe is actually connecting this to a chassid of the Rebbe who passed away on Friday of 1992 of Shabbos Parshas Va'era. And the Rebbe dedicated an entire talk at the Fabrein, at the Hasidic gathering, in honor of this chassid, and speaks there about the concept of what it says in the Talmud, that if someone passes away on Friday, it's a very good sign. So the Rebbe says this event, passing away on a Friday, being a good sign, if we need any more signs, we're taking it as a sign that already all the work was done of all the mission of refinement, of purification of all the matters of the world in as much as could be and more. And everything is ready for the ultimate messianic meal, the meal of the future. As we know, we're entering in Shabbos. Shabbos is a taste of the ultimate Shabbos, Mashiach, that will be absolutely complete. And the Rebbe here is speaking about eating the fish because the person that passed away, his last name was Hecht, and Hecht means a fish. So the Rebbe connects this to the whole illusion of the fish and being compared to fish, and the eating of the fish that we eat on Shabbos. And the ultimate fish we're going to eat by Mashiach, of course, is the Levyasan, that ultimate fish, and the Shahabar, the wild ox, and the Yain HaMeshumar, the wine that's been guarded since the beginning of time, that we should all physically eat. These are all very Kabbalistic, deep concepts. They all represent God's energies, and they all will also be physical foods that we are going to eat. So we should do so very, very, very soon. Thank you so much for joining. We should all take strength, and we should all, just like Firma got her salvation for one of the issues, God willing, she should also experience for everything else. And we should all be able to say, oh, Alter Rebbe, you came through for me. Thank you. You kept your word. Thank you. Good night. Have a wonderful week.
Good night. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you.